The road to country music's core wasn't lit by flashbulbs or cleared with ease. For Jeannie Seely, it began in a small Pennsylvania town, where oil fields hummed and radio waves carried dreams far beyond the hills. She sang young, worked hard, and held fast to melodies that never let her go. The path from secretary to Grammy winner wasn't mapped. It was carved, line by line, in smoky clubs and quiet studios. Her voice, low and full of lived-in truth, didn't demand attention, it earned it. When she stepped onto the Grand Ole Opry stage in a miniskirt, it wasn't rebellion. It was a woman arriving exactly as she was, refusing to edit herself for approval. That moment turned heads, but it was the years that followed that proved her place. Beneath the lights, behind the curtain, she endured whispered doubts and double standards. As others came and went, Jeannie stayed, sometimes invisible, always unshaken. Her name wasn't always front page, but it was stitched into every chapter. Even as the industry turned glossy and youth-obsessed, she didn't chase the spotlight. She held her ground, quietly becoming a constant in a place that rarely made room for constants. Time aged her voice, but sharpened its edge. And the Opry, once reluctant to fully embrace her, became the very stage she would define. Behind the applause were sacrifices not seen by the crowd. Love that frayed under pressure. Friends who faded when fame did. Rooms that grew quiet after the curtain fell. Jeannie weathered them all with the same grace she brought to every verse. The battles weren't always public, but they were deep, and they shaped the woman behind the music. Industry trends passed over her, yet she remained, not by accident, but by force of will. Even when invitations slowed and airplay stopped, she kept showing up. That persistence was not a plea for relevance, it was a quiet act of rebellion. Through heartbreak and eras that demanded reinvention, she stayed true to her tone. Her songs bore the weight of years, and her presence said more than headlines ever could. She watched others disappear into memory, but she became memory itself, a bridge between what was and what still matters. Now, at 90, she stands where few women have stood so long, not because she was allowed, but because she refused to leave. Each note she sings is a reminder. Survival is not silent. It hums. It endures. And in Jeannie Seely's case, it still echoes. She arrived in Nashville with experience, talent, and a voice honed by rejection and relentless effort. It didn't take long before her songwriting reached the ears of country's elite. But the real breakthrough came with Don't Touch Me, a song that wrapped sensuality in sadness and brought her the Grammy, only the third woman in country music to earn that honor at the time. It was a moment that could have been a final destination. Instead, it became the start of a new climb, one marked by tension and scrutiny. Her success, rather than opening doors wide, seemed to invite quiet resistance. She was no longer just a secretary turned songwriter. She was now a visible woman in a space still unsure how to handle that. The Grand Ole Opry welcomed her with applause, but eyed her with caution. Her first performance as a member, wearing a miniskirt, wasn't meant to provoke, but it did. Whispers followed her down the hallways. Some questioned her choices, others her staying power. But she didn't flinch. She wasn't there to impress. She was there to stay. And in staying, she began to unsettle a system built to outgrow women like her. The Opry, though framed as a family, wasn't immune to the politics of preference. Jeannie watched prime slots handed to male performers while talented women were shuffled to the side. Airplay was limited. Recognition came slowly, or not at all. She saw how age added another layer of invisibility. Female artists, once celebrated, began to vanish, unannounced, unexplained, almost expected. They called it the slow fade, and Jeannie felt its chill in the spaces between performances, in the quiet that followed once roaring applause. But she stayed. That staying became an act of quiet rebellion, one that didn't make headlines, but carved deep into the institution. Even when her marriage to Hank Cochran cracked under the pressure of two strong-willed artists living in the spotlight, she found strength in song. The divorce didn't unravel her. It refined her voice into something even more honest. While others shaped themselves to fit trends, Jeannie remained unmistakably herself. The fire behind her eyes never flickered, even when the stage lights did. She returned week after week, not to prove anything, but because the music still called her. As the genre shifted in the 80s and 90s, becoming polished and commercial, Jeannie stood out, not for resistance, but for consistency. She didn't chase youth. She didn't reinvent to stay relevant. Instead, she let the years deepen her presence. While many of her peers disappeared quietly, she became a fixture at the Opry, not as a token, but as a standard. Her voice matured, textured with time, and still capable of silencing a room. The industry didn't offer her front-page spreads or label deals anymore, but it couldn't erase her. She had become part of the Opry structure, her performances less about show and more about grounding. Her very presence was a protest against erasure. In her 50s, when others bowed out gracefully, she leaned in harder. She championed the forgotten. She gave space to the overlooked. And she did it without fanfare, just by showing up. Her longevity wasn't accidental. It was fought for, day by day, night by night. She became the longest-tenured female member in Opry history, not because she played the game, but because she refused to play by anyone else's rules. The battles behind the scenes rarely made headlines, but they defined her legacy. She faced health scares, personal grief, and the exhausting weight of being overlooked. Still, she didn't retreat. She chose transparency, speaking candidly about the sexism and ageism baked into the system she helped build. Her voice, once an instrument of melody, became a tool of truth. Without bitterness, she pointed out the inequities, offering perspective rooted in decades of endurance. Collaborations with younger artists breathed new energy into her career, allowing her to become a mentor as well as a performer. These weren't just duets. They were handoffs of wisdom, moments where generations intersected with reverence. The Opry of today looks different, filled with fresh voices and broader representation. Jeannie welcomes it, but she reminds the industry that its history holds more than statistics. It holds people who made survival an art. Her performances now carry echoes of every era she endured, every stage she refused to leave. The applause she receives today is not for novelty, but for tenacity. In her story, there's no triumphant finale, only a steady, unwavering presence. And sometimes, that's the most powerful kind. Years passed, and while the spotlight turned elsewhere, Jeannie Seely remained on that storied Opry stage, a presence that would not be moved. But what the audience didn't see was the quiet toll exacted by an industry that still hadn't made peace with women aging on their own terms. Behind the velvet curtains and polite applause, Jeannie stood as a quiet witness to the slow removal of her peers. Women who had built their careers on radio waves and live shows began disappearing from lineups. No announcements, no farewells, just gaps where legends used to stand. It wasn't a coincidence, it was a pattern. She saw the shape of a system that let women vanish quietly while their male counterparts received tributes and prime slots. She felt that disappearance creeping toward her too, a slow fade intended to silence through omission. But she did not step back. Instead, she sang louder, stood longer, and took up space in rooms where she was no longer expected. Her presence, week after week, year after year, grew heavier with meaning. It wasn't just about tradition, it was about resistance. Not the kind that demanded confrontation, but the kind that wore resilience like armor. Each time she took the mic, it became more than a performance. It became a declaration that she was not finished. She was still here. And that truth unsettled a system that had grown used to forgetting. In her 50s and beyond, Jeannie transformed into something more than a veteran. She became a mirror the industry couldn't ignore. Her continued presence at the Opry wasn't nostalgia, it was accountability. Her voice still carried, not with the same youthful sparkle, but with a weathered gravity that commanded attention. And still, even with all she had endured, recognition came late and cautiously. No grand celebrations. No sweeping acknowledgments. Just the ongoing work of showing up. She made no loud demands. She didn't ask to be honored. She simply refused to be erased. that refusal, quiet and constant, became her greatest statement. She made history not through a comeback, but through never leaving. That longevity, uninterrupted and undeniable, challenged the industry's perception of worth. While newer acts rose fast and bright, Jeannie remained, steady and glowing like an ember that never died. Her name was not always on the lips of rising stars, but her presence lingered in every chord they sang. And when the tides began to turn, when younger artists started to speak openly about sexism and ageism, they found her already there, holding space, making room. The irony was sharp. The woman once viewed as too bold, too modern, too outspoken had become the guide through country music's reckoning with its past. But she hadn't changed. The world around her was finally catching up. There was a weight to her story that couldn't be softened by retrospectives or rewritten in celebration. Her pain was real, her fights long. She had loved and lost, stood tall and been pushed down. Even at the height of her accomplishments, she faced silence where applause should have lived. But she never let the silence define her. Instead, she filled it with truth, unpolished, unwavering, and rooted in experience. The Opry, once hesitant to fully embrace her, eventually stood on the foundation she helped build. Her record as the longest-tenured female member wasn't just a number, it was a monument to endurance. She had performed through shifting tastes, cultural changes, and personal heartbreak. She had watched institutions bend but never break for women like her, until she became the exception. And even then, she carried the weight of those who weren't so lucky. Her story was not tidy. It was layered with grief, grit, and the kind of resilience that doesn't fade under stage lights. When she opened her mouth to sing, decades poured out, moments of triumph tangled with years of survival. She didn't need to say she'd been overlooked. Her song said it for her. And still, she gave her heart to the stage, night after night, never asking for more than the space she had earned 1,000 times over. In that persistence, in that refusal to disappear, Jeannie Seely didn't just rewrite her own legacy, she rewrote the rules for everyone who came after her. At 90 years old, Jeannie Seely still walks out onto the Grand Ole Opry stage, not as a relic of the past, but as a force shaped by everything she's endured. She no longer needs to wear a miniskirt to make a statement. Her presence alone is the message. The woman who once stirred discomfort by daring to be herself now stands as a symbol of country music's overlooked backbone. There are fewer whispers now. Instead, there's quiet reverence, even if it comes without fanfare. The applause that greets her is different than before, slower, steadier, more aware of what it took to stay. She performs not to reclaim relevance, but to reaffirm a truth that never wavered. Her artistry was never about trend. It was always about truth. Every line she sings now carries more weight than ever. And those watching closely can feel the years behind each note. They hear the heartbreak, the grit, the defiance wrapped in elegance. Her music was never made for short-lived charts. It was made to outlast the silence. Jeannie's story lives not in headlines, but in the legacy etched quietly into a genre that once tried to move past her. But she never let it. She outlasted the fade. And in doing so, she became the proof that staying matters. Her reflections in recent years have offered something deeper than nostalgia. They carry a clarity born from standing still while the world around her shifted. She doesn't speak in bitterness, but in calm recognition of the inequities she faced and outlived. She calls out what's been lost, not with accusation, but with care. She reminds others of the roots they stand on, even as they build new branches. Her voice has become one of witness, not just performer. In telling her truth, she opens a space for others to tell theirs. Not with drama, but with grace. And that honesty has become her quiet revolution. She names the things many were afraid to name. She calls out musical amnesia, the tendency to erase rather than honor. Her legacy stands in contrast to that forgetting. She stayed when she wasn't celebrated. She gave when she wasn't acknowledged. And that offering, consistent and unapologetic, has shaped the very foundation of the Opry's present. Younger artists now share the stage she once had to fight to keep. And in doing so, they carry pieces of her with them. Not always knowingly, but undeniably. That's how influence works when it's earned, not imposed. It weaves into the fabric of the art itself. And through it, she continues to speak. Jeannie Seely's story does not end in a final act or curtain call. It continues in echoes, in songs carried forward by those she inspired. Her life is not only marked by milestones, but by the long road between them. The spaces where she wasn't seen but kept showing up. The performances given with no guarantees. The truth told when silence was easier. That's where her strength lives. In a world quick to move on, she held her ground. Her journey invites reflection, not just on one woman's resilience, but on what it means to endure with dignity. She didn't demand a seat at the table. She built her own and never got up. And in doing so, she made space for others. Her presence challenges the idea that longevity is accidental. It isn't. It's crafted, protected, and fought for. And when it's earned, it cannot be taken away. Now, as the lights shine on newer names, Jeannie remains a steady flame in the wings. Watching, singing, reminding. Her legacy is not only that of a survivor, but of someone who dared to remain visible long after the world stopped looking. That courage doesn't fade. It lingers. And it shapes what comes next.